This is For the Rest of Us with Canon Megan and Adam, a podcast about theology, faith, the Bible, and life. You know, for the rest of us. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back to For the Rest of Us with Canon Megan and Adam. You figured it out by now. I'm not Megan Castellan. My name is Adam Eichelberger. I work with Megan at the Episcopal Diocese of Central New York. You can kind of think of me like the Scottie Pippen to her Michael Jordan as we battle it out against the Detroit Pistons. That is the world around us as we discover what it is to live and be in this life through the lens of the Episcopal faith. Megan, welcome back. I know you've got something very good for us to talk about today. So what do you got?
Today, we are continuing our occasional series called Better Know a Saint. And today, we are talking about the amazing Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray.
Excellent. What do you got for us?
So Pauli Murray is one of those amazing saints. Sometimes saints do one thing very awesomely, like they're a martyr in ancient Rome. Very impressive, get to be a saint because of that. And sometimes they're like Pauli Murray and they manage to do everything in an amazing and incredible way. Pauli used to be a sort of niche esoteric saint. A few people knew who they were. If you were a women's studies major or really into legal theory, now they're getting the attention that they rightly deserve as one of the foremost legal scholars and pioneers of intersectionality, and one of the pioneers of full inclusion in the Episcopal Church. I just want to say before we get started, I am going to use pronouns they and them predominantly to talk about Pauli during this podcast, because scholars have come to the consensus that even though reading back into someone's life and trying to assign our modern categories and understandings is perilous. And even though definitely Pauli during her time in the early 20th century, early to mid 20th century, did not have the categories like gender dysphoria or transgender or sort of our understandings around that. Very definitely for Pauli, something was going on about their understanding of their own gender. Pauli was born Anna Pauline Murray. When she came to adulthood, she changed her name to Pauli to be less conventionally feminine. Pauli wrote a lot about being conflicted about their gender identity. At one point, Pauli had exploratory surgery to try and establish what they thought was surely the presence of male sex organs. They sought out hormone replacement therapy. And so there was clearly a lot going on. For this reason, her History Center and scholars who do work around Pauli Murray use they them pronouns to honor this aspect of Pauli's identity. And I'm going to try and follow that convention. I'm sure I'm going to slip up a couple times, and I will try and correct myself when I do.
So a little bit of grace, dear listeners.
Yes.
This is something that we want to make sure that we are mindful of and honor the legacy of Pauli Murray as we discuss their life.
Right.
But please understand, for those of you who know about the life of Pauli Murray and their history, that in honoring that as best we can, we are human and fallible and make mistakes, and sometimes we may use the wrong pronouns, which does not come from any kind of place of ill intent.
Right. And I'm going to correct myself when I mess up.
That's the best thing that we can do, is when we make mistakes.
So Pauli was born in Baltimore, Maryland in 1910. Early on, they moved to Durham, North Carolina to be raised by their maternal aunt, a number of maternal aunts. And this was due to Pauli basically being orphaned. Pauli's dad ended up in a mental institution, and their mom was really not equipped to raise a young child. And so Pauli ends up being raised by extended family. Not unusual for a poor family of that time, not unusual today in a poor family. They are raised in Durham. It's going to be kind of their home base. Pauli is precocious from the get-go. Pauli does really well in school. When they finish school that is available to them locally, remember, this is Jim Crow, everything is segregated. They move to New York City to live with a cousin and go to preparatory school in advance of being accepted into Hunter College when they're 16. 1933, they graduate with a bachelor's in English literature. Normally, that would have entitled them to go to Columbia University on a full-ride scholarship, but Columbia University does not admit women, so no scholarship. This is going to become a reoccurring theme throughout Pauli's life. Pauli will excel phenomenally well, do better than everyone else in the room, and then not be able to advance because whatever institution does not admit Black people does not admit women. So you're going to hear this coming back again and again. Pauli is undeterred. They continue their studies at the New Workers' School, which is founded by essentially a reformist movement within the wider global Communist Party. This is during the New Deal, in the middle of the Great Depression, before McCarthyism, before the U.S. really got super, super paranoid about communism, before Stalinism took over the USSR, and before everyone got very terrified about kind of the implications of socialism. And so Pauli really begins to learn about the pitfalls of unchecked capitalism and sort of revolutionary ideas around economic theory. They take a job selling the newspaper for the National Urban League, which is a northern civil rights organization, until their health gives out and their boss suggests that they go someplace better for their health. Around the same time, FDR has come into power and has started to set up civilian conservation corps camps around the country. Here in upstate New York, we benefited amazingly from these. They built most of our parks, so props to the CCCs. His wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, at the time, also really pushed Franklin to create women parallel camps. And Pauli ends up going to one of these, Camp Terra. And while they were there, they meet Eleanor Roosevelt, and they become friends. Pauli and Eleanor actually have a fair amount in common, both Episcopalian. Pauli had grown up going to the Episcopal Church. She went to St. Titus with her aunts in North Carolina, continued to go to the Episcopal Church. Eleanor Roosevelt, also devout Episcopalian. Also, going to go out on a limb a little bit here. Also kind of have unconventional romantic relationships, Pauli and Eleanor. Also have radical political ideas and care a lot about freedom and inclusion and things like that. So at this point, Pauli and Eleanor hit it off and start writing to each other. They will continue having a friendship by letter for the rest of their lives. However, Pauli gets fired by the camp director. Camp director finds a book about Marx in their suitcase. Also doesn't like that Pauli is hooking up with a white camp counselor who's a woman. So no more Camp Terra for Pauli. However, Pauli, again undeterred, decides to apply for a PhD at the University of North Carolina. Again, Pauli is rejected because, say it with me, the University of North Carolina does not admit Black people. It's the 1940s, and everything is still segregated by law. So Pauli at this point is a journalist and decides that they're not going to take this lying down. They go to the newspapers and they widely publicize the fact that they, a valedictorian now at Hunter College, a friend of Eleanor Roosevelt, is getting turned away from the preeminent university of the South. Sort of hilariously, Pauli keeps writing and cornering public figures, telling them about what happened, and then publishing their responses in newspapers to sort of embarrass them into action. Sort of like very early Twitter. You know how you would like...
she's subtweeting people in the 1940s?
Yeah. Pauli is subtweeting people via letter in the 1940s. You gotta love it. So this is Pauli's campaign to get admitted to the UNC and combat segregation. It kind of doesn't immediately work. The NAACP said that they were going to defend Pauli in this case, but then decides not to because this tactic of subtweeting is too embarrassing. They don't want to do it. They think it's beneath them. This sort of like, I'm just going to rail at you by letter until you do what I want is, I think, a lot of who Pauli is. And so around also this time, Pauli is walking around in Rhode Island. Apparently, according to the police reports, she is distraught over the disappearance of a woman friend. She is taken into custody by the police And the police decide that, and here I'm going to use feminine pronouns, the police decide that she is hysterical and they commit her to Bellevue Psychiatric Hospital in New York City. So this starts a number of instances where Pauli appears to struggle with her mental health. But I want to put an asterisk here because Pauli, as someone who is evidently struggling with gender dysphoria, on top of being an incredibly intelligent Black person who is being read as a woman in 1930s, 1940s America, that alone is going to give you mental problems.
Right.
Like, apart from, if she was depressed or what else. So it's a little bit difficult to parse out what exactly was happening, whether the police just read the situation in a racist way or in a sexist way, or if she was struggling in a way that was additional or apart from that. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, it totally makes sense.
Yeah. She doesn't stay in Bellevue long, and she bonds enough with her roommate that the roommate and Pauli decide to go down to Durham to visit Pauli's aunts that raised her. While they're on their way down there, they go through Petersburg, Virginia. Again, this is 1940, remember? And they're riding on a bus where the seats in the back of the bus, again, 20 years before Rosa Parks, 25 years before Rosa Parks, seats on the back of the bus are reserved for Black people, and they are broken. So Pauli and their friend have to stand up for hours. And the two of them are having a long conversation about Gandhi's campaign of nonviolence in India. And Pauli finally decides that they have had enough of the broken seats. They have had enough of standing up, and they are going to move. So they move to the front of the bus. They are asked to go back, and they say no. And the police are called. The police ask them to go back, and they say no. They are arrested and thrown in jail. So Pauli basically has a one-person bus boycott, Rosa Parks moment, 25 years before Rosa Parks. By this point, the NAACP thinks that Pauli is too confrontational. They have a problem with her wearing pants instead of skirts, was one of the things the NAACP was saying about them at this point. So Pauli is defended by the Workers' Defense League, which a little bit more leftist than the NAACP was at this point. And they get the charges reduced. This starts Pauli being really interested in the law and the potential of the law to achieve social change and to achieve good and to protect all people. Pauli is hired by the Workers' Defense League during the trial, and after that, they start at Howard University Law School in 1941 as the only assigned female in the class. On the first day of school, one of their professors looks at them and says, "I don't know why women are allowed to be in law school. It's a waste of time. And your seat could have gone to someone more worthy." And that kind of lights a fire, Around this time, Pauli starts to kind of articulate the way that in their life, the two forces of racism and sexism intersect and both affect them. They call it the force of Jane Crow, like Jim Crow, only female. Pauli graduates first in the class, because of course they do. And again, normally the person who graduates first in the class from Howard Law gets a full ride scholarship to Harvard for graduate studies. But guess what? Harvard Law School does not accept women.
Yet again.
Yet again. Say it with me. Pauli even gets a letter of support from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who is still the sitting president, to try and lobby Harvard to change their mind. And again, they publish all this in the newspaper because Pauli likes a good subtweet. And Pauli says, "I would gladly change my sex to meet your requirements, but since the way to such change has not been revealed to me, I have no recourse but to appeal to you to change your minds. Are you to tell me that one is as difficult as the other?" And Harvard remains Harvard and doesn't let them in. Pauli goes to UC Berkeley instead. While there, they write a thesis on the right to equal employment, arguing that the right to work is an inalienable right, should not be decided on the basis of anything other than it being an essential human right. They pass the bar. They are hired to be the first Black assigned female deputy attorney general in 1945 for California. They run for New York City council seat in Brooklyn the next year, don't get elected. And they then work at a major law firm in New York City where they meet an up-and-coming lawyer named Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And they become friends. Pauli has a genius for making some good friends, I have to say.
Yeah, I'd say so.
So Pauli doesn't stay at Paul and Weiss law firm very long. They meet RBG and they hit it off. And Pauli goes off to continue their academic work. In 1950, she publishes what is kind of her seminal work. They write States Laws on Race and Color, which was a giant compendium, an examination of all of the segregation laws in the country. But what it did that was different is that it combined sociology and psychology with legal information. It didn't just look at the plain text of the law, but it also looked at what effect did the law have on people? What effect did attending segregated schools have on children? What effect did being in substandard housing, what effect did that have on people? What effect does separate water fountains have on people? And she's working with Thurgood Marshall, working with all of the other lawyers, and the NAACP is beginning to welcome what she's doing at this point. But this is a new approach to attacking segregation laws and attacking inequality in the law. Up until then, the NAACP's legal strategy had been fairly conservative. It had been trying to prove that segregational facilities were unequal because the Supreme Court case that established them as constitutional said that they had to be separate but equal. So NAACP had been trying to argue that they were inherently unequal. Pauli said, I want you to prove that they're just unconstitutional because they're just wrong. And so behind this, they throw all of the weight of psychology, sociology, and the facts of people's lives. And this is an entirely new approach. And when Thurgood Marshall goes to argue Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, he uses Pauli's work, this new approach. And when the NAACP starts winning cases, this is what they're using. So in 1961, JFK appoints her to be on the first Commission on the Status of Women. There, they wrote another report arguing that the 14th Amendment already prohibits discrimination based on gender. This makes a big impact. This is the nascent women's rights movement. At the same time, Pauli is beginning to critique her own civil rights movement for not platforming enough women. She writes kind of an angry open letter to the organizers of the March on Washington asking why they didn't give women speaking parts. Pauli is one of the people who pushes to add sex as a protected class in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Pauli is one of the founders of the National Organization for Women, hoping that it will be like the NAACP, only a little bit more revolutionary, because I think Pauli is frustrated with them still, in working to advance the rights and causes of women under the law. So Pauli is having this major outsized impact on the way civil rights law is thought about and talked about. And again, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg gets up to argue the case of gender discrimination under the 14th Amendment, she credits Pauli Murray as one of the co-authors of her case. Because, and she has said this since, that Pauli Murray is one of the biggest influences in the way she thinks about law, because Pauli's kind of approach is so global and so groundbreaking. Around the same time, the Episcopal Church is changing. Episcopal Church first allows women on vestries in 1965. Before then, it had been talking about allowing the ordination of women, and by 1970, women were allowed to attend seminary. And Pauli decides to be first in line, which confuses everyone. Everyone is super confused. Everyone's like, wait a minute, you're a major academic lawyer person who is fighting for truth and justice in the secular world. Why are you suddenly like tossing it to the side and going to seminary? And Pauli's argument was that the law could only do so much, but ultimately, in order to achieve justice in the world, people needed to be healed in their hearts. People needed to be changed and made new in their hearts. In their experience, that happened in church. That happened through mediating the power of the sacraments. So they were one of the first people to attend seminary once the ban on non-male people was lifted. And they were the first African-American non-male person to be ordained after the Philadelphia 11.
Pretty big deal.
Yeah. Fun fact, Pauli thought the Philadelphia 11 were premature. If you watch the movie, which is available on PBS this month, but if you watch the movie about the first 11 women who were ordained, They talk a little bit about how they wanted it to be a multiracial group, but no African American woman was ready to be ordained at that point, and the risk was too great for Black women as opposed to white women. And so while there was this big group that included Pauli Murray talking about what they were going to do, it was the white women who decided they were able to withstand the risk of being ordained. And then being excommunicated, being cast out of the church, not having jobs, this kind of like tidal wave of backlash that did happen to them. And Pauli, for their part, thought that they needed to wait another couple of years, that they were young, that they were impetuous, they didn't know how to work the system. And they say a couple things along the lines of young whippersnappers, they don't know how to wait. If you just give it a couple more years, people will come around, and we have to do it legally, and we have to do it through a process, which I kind of enjoy. I kind of enjoy the mental image of Polly sitting in a corner of a room with really like bright-eyed, bushy-tailed 23-year-old white women being like, oh, good Lord, there they go again. They're going to get us all killed. But Polly is ordained as the first African-American non-male person. And she got to go home to North Carolina to the church of their ancestors and where they had been raised with their aunts. And they lived out their last years being a priest there and being the associate for pastoral care, which is a nice kind of coda to a really incredible life. I haven't even talked about the poetry that they wrote. They wrote a memoir about their maternal family, tracing the legacy of their family through slavery and through Reconstruction in the US and kind of the effect that that had on their family. Pauli was a polymath, but someone who deeply, deeply believed in the goodness of people and the ability and the responsibility of Christians to make this world a more just place for everyone.
It's also a really good reminder for us that when we look at these really important moments in the mid to late 20th century that have shaped what it is that our society has kind of become today, or the things that our society is supposed to stand for today, that this is the person who played such an integral role
Yep.
in all of that. And this is not a person who comes from a place of traditional power or
Privilege.
privilege. Thank you. This is not a person who comes from a position of power or privilege, but fought. And it's a reminder to us, especially those of us in the church, if you consider yourself a church person, that it's our job to do the work. We don't get a pass.
Yep. And not for nothing, but the main, if you look at the kind of construction of the sort of better things about the US, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the threadbare welfare state that we have, the New Deal, those, by many metrics, were put into place by 4 Episcopalians. Pauli Murray, Thurgood Marshall, also Episcopalian, Francis Perkins, and FDR. So
It's pretty important.
it's pretty important. I mean, I don't want to say that too loudly because, then we'll really lose our tax exempt status. But, Frances Perkins, when she was hired by FDR, was an incredibly devout laywoman. And she told him, I am coming to Washington to work for you. But more importantly, I'm coming to Washington to work for God and the poor people of God's children. And she had the whole Social Security thing mapped out. She did it with her priest. She knew exactly what she was going to do. The idea that we as Episcopalians have a absolute responsibility to make this world more just, to do what we can to change the systems that we exist in, to make them less oppressive for those around us, has been integral in our tradition for a long time. We don't talk about it a lot.
And that's really important.
Yeah.
It's really important for us to keep this in the forefront of our minds. The obligation is on us. That a lot of times I think in the church, and listener, I'm still what many would consider a baby Episcopalian, but I feel like this kind of has crept its way into like traditional longstanding American churches like the Episcopal Church. It happens in my own history in the Roman Catholic Church, that we separate our faith from politics. That these two things do not intersect at all. And we're supposed to, keep church and state separate. This is a reminder to everybody that what that means is that there can't be a state-sponsored church. That doesn't mean that faith and our politics remain totally separate from one another. These things are incredibly intertwined. They're incredibly foundational to how we have tried to help establish a state, a country where everybody experiences freedom and everybody has the same level of rights and opportunity. Those things are born out of people of faith. Now, again, listener, if you are somebody who is not a person of particular faith or not of our shared faith in the Episcopal tradition, or you're not a Christian, that doesn't mean that people of no faith or differing faiths did not contribute to this work. This is a call out. This is me calling out my fellow Christians to be like, hey, don't shirk away from this because you feel like you're a person of faith.
Exactly. And, particularly for someone like Pauli, there is no way that their faith could not be political because their existence was political. Getting on a bus for them was a political act. Sitting in a seat on a bus for them was demonstrably a political act. There is no way for Pauli Murray that their faith could be anything other than political because everything they did was political. Trying to attend school, trying to get into college, trying to write a letter, trying to, have a relationship. Every single thing that they did in their life was inherently political and made so by the world in which they inhabited. So it is a particular sort of almost head in the sand denial for those of us with privilege to say, oh, my faith is not political. There are those of us who don't have that luxury. And so for those of us who do have the luxury of having power and privilege, we have an absolute responsibility to use our faith and use our power on behalf of those who live politicized existences and who live politicized lives because they don't have this choice and they have to, everything has to be argued out. Everything has to be fought over. And so we don't have the luxury, if we're going to follow Jesus, of saying, well, my faith isn't political.
Absolutely right. Well, listener, we hope that you have learned something. I definitely did learn something new because I was definitely familiar with Pauli Murray, but just how foundational that Pauli Murray was to civil rights in our country and all the privileges and things that I and others managed to enjoy, Pauli played a very critical role in. So I thank you for this, Megan. Listener, if you are enjoying the podcast, if you learned something, do us a favor, wherever you're listening to it, whether it's on your computer, on your phone, go into the app where you're listening to this. You'll see that there are some stars. Give us however many stars you feel like you want. I feel like if I know you, and I think I do, you're leaning towards 5, but it's okay. We'll accept a little bit less if necessary. Leave us a review, share it with a friend. Hey, if you're interested in other podcasts, we've got a couple more for you to listen to. If you go to cnyepiscopal.org/dio-cny-podcasts, and that link will be in the episode notes, you can find all kinds of other podcasts that we do here in our diocese. Now, as always, Megan, we need your advice as a priest, and here's a big one.
Uh-oh.
So if you need to take your time, you can take your time.
Okay.
What is one thing that we, as the members of the For the Rest of Us community, can do to make the world a better place this week?
Oh, I would say pull a Pauli Murray and call your member of Congress and just tell them what you think about something. Not going to tell you what to voice your opinion on, but call your member of Congress and let them know what you think.
Amen to that. And you know that because it's coming from a priest, it's not just a good idea. That's an order. Pauli Murray, pray for us. Friends,
Amen.
We will talk to you next time on For the Rest of Us. Take care. Thanks for stopping by and checking out For the Rest of Us with Canon Megan. If you like the show, maybe subscribe, share it with a friend, leave us a review, and we hope to see you again next time. For the Rest of Us is a production of the Episcopal Diocese of Central New York.